Road handlebars. How narrow is too narrow? If you've seen any of my recent videos, you've no doubt noticed me riding an incredibly narrow road handlebar. Plenty of you in the comments have asked why the hell I'm riding such a narrow bar. Well, you asked for it. So I'm going to dive in to the crazy world of handlebar width and answer the key questions you'll no doubt be asking. First, I'll talk about what narrow bars are and why you might want to use them. Then, as I'm sure you're keen to find out, I'll explain how narrow road handlebars affect handling and what kind of width you should go for. Finally, I will tell you what I think is too narrow and what my current favourite road handlebar is. But before that, I want to know what you think, what your preferred handlebar width is. So please let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, why not give this video a cheeky like and subscribe to our channel. What are narrow handlebars? Let's start by defining what constitutes a narrow road handlebar. Now, there's no industry-wide accepted definition, but given the standard handlebar sizing range for road bikes is around 40 to 44 centimeters, I would define a narrow handlebar as anything narrower than 40 centimeters. Typically, handlebar width increases with frame size. Smaller bikes often have a 40 centimeter bar, anything around medium will get 42 centimeter bars, and larger bikes typically get 44 centimeter or even wider handlebars. On the flip side, a wide handlebar would be anything wider than 44 centimeters, according to my definition, as that falls outside of the standard range. How is handlebar width measured? Now, I'm sure you're keen to know what your handlebar width is, so let me tell you how handlebars are usually measured. Handlebar width is typically defined as the width between the brake lever mounting points, and it's most often measured from the center line of each drop. Some brands, however, such as Dada, measure from one outside edge of the handlebar to the other. So take care when looking at upgrading or switching to a different brand. Why might you want to use narrow handlebars? Bike position aside, the primary reason to use narrower handlebars is to lower your aerodynamic drag. Your body is the largest contributor of aerodynamic drag in the Rider Plus bike system. According to aerodynamics expert Dr. Xavier Disley, the gains to be made from switching to narrow handlebars are in the region of around half a watt per 10 millimeters at a speed of 30 kilometers per hour. However, if you're travelling at 45 kilometers per hour, you actually gain more like 2 watts per 10 millimeters. Now, at this point, you may well be reaching for the comments, but hear me out. To give you some context on those figures, swapping from a 42 centimeter handlebar to a 38 centimeter handlebar is worth around 7 to 8 watts at 45 kilometers per hour, which is actually roughly equivalent from switching from an 80mm rear wheel to a disc wheel on a time trial bike. Now, you might feel that this isn't relevant for you, but I believe for what could be a fairly cost-effective swap, this is actually quite significant. It's for this reason we saw so many of the world's best track cyclists using extremely narrow handlebars at the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. But what about the speeds of a more average cyclist? Well, the wattage savings at lower speeds are admittedly less impressive at a surface level. That said, though the absolute wattages saved are smaller, a slower rider will always be on the course for longer and therefore has more time to gain, in theory. So, if you're considering upgrading your bike to be more slippery, a narrow bar could represent good value for money. Many bikes, however, do come with integrated bar and stems, which can add a considerable amount of cash and possibly further headaches with installation. So if you have one of those bikes, I'm sorry. So, how do narrow handlebars affect handling? Well, given I'm not a professional bike fitter or bike designer, I spoke to Joss Coop, product developer at Pro, for his view on the topic. When it comes to handling, there are, according to Coop, two things at play with narrow handlebars: steering torque and force input accuracy. I asked Coop to compare a standard 42 centimeter road handlebar to a super narrow 26 centimeter one to understand the influence of handlebar width on both of these factors. Before talking about force input accuracy, let's start with steering torque. Now, steering torque is how much force is required to turn a handlebar by a given amount. As most people know, longer levers increase leverage. So wider handlebars therefore require less physical effort to turn than narrow ones. Comparing a 42cm handlebar to a 26cm handlebar, the turning circle decreases by about 20%, according to Coop. Coop says if you have a lot of steering to do, you can be sure to get more tired when using a narrower handlebar. A rider can adapt to this to a certain extent, says Coop, and increasing stem length or handlebar reach would also negate this effect by increasing the size of the turning circle to compensate. The key for any rider is to weigh up the potential benefits against any pitfalls. As mentioned earlier, the second thing at play is force input accuracy. This is how precisely your steering inputs are translated to the handlebar. How easy it is to make the exact steering adjustment you intended to. The ends of a wider handlebar have to travel further when turning, which slows down the speed of steering for any given force input. Theoretically, this should make it easier to steer the bike more accurately and not over or understeer. It's not the easiest concept to explain, so again, let's compare a 42cm handlebar to a 26cm handlebar and consider force input accuracy. Coop explained to me that with a narrower bar, the distance travelled by the hands to achieve a certain steering angle is decreased by around 20%. Essentially, this translates to quicker handling, because the distance to rotate the handlebar when turning the bike is shorter. The shorter bar, however, will also be more prone to variations. So, if you're the type of rider who pushes and pulls a lot on their bars while riding, then you're more likely to notice the handling effects of this with a narrower handlebar. Because of this, Coop recommends that narrow handlebars are best suited to a more steady riding style and more experienced riders. Again, this is likely something that can be adapted to over time, but Coop says someone with less strength and motor skills is better off selecting a slightly wider handlebar. So, to summarise then, a narrower bar will mean more effort is needed to turn them, but the handling is faster compared to a wider bar. So, you've heard about the benefits and potentially the negatives of a narrower handlebar. So, how narrow should you go? Or how narrow is too narrow? In terms of aerodynamics, track testing by Aero Coach shows an 11.3 watt saving at 45 km per hour when switching from 38 to 28cm handlebars, with even greater savings at higher speeds. But is it actually sensible to use such narrow handlebars on the road? To attempt to answer this question, I acquired the narrowest drop handlebars I could find, a set of Works track handlebars which measure just 26cm at the brake hoods and 33cm at the drops. And the results? Well, I found there were plenty of advantages from using this handlebar, but there were also some disadvantages, including primarily the way they look on the bike. Let's first of all address the elephant in the room. Handlebars like this do look unusual, and that's being charitable. This handlebar has already attracted its fair share of comments from you, and let's just say many of you haven't been particularly enamoured by the looks of it. It's a bit like chunky aero optimised frames versus a classic and clean looking frame like the Specialized AFOS. Which one would you rather own? And if that alone is enough to put you off, well, so be it. It depends what you're willing to sacrifice in order to potentially ride your bike a bit faster. But hey, let me know what you think in the comments below. Let's go on with the advantages. As you might expect, when you're clipping along on flat or rolling roads, handlebars this narrow offer a noticeably more aerodynamic riding position. That probably won't shock anyone, but the biggest surprise is how relatively normal they feel though. Before testing, I was concerned that such narrow handlebars would make the bike difficult to handle, but my fears were mostly misplaced. Essentially, after about 10 minutes or so of riding, the bike felt surprisingly normal most of the time. Now, I think this makes sense once you remember that a lot of steering on a road bike is performed by leaning and counter-steering rather than large steering inputs from the hands. Because of this, the effect on steering torque and input accuracy mentioned by Coop don't come into play all that often. I did notice those things when climbing out of the saddle though, so we'll talk more about that later. The Works track handlebars have flared drops, and I appreciated that extra width when descending at speed. At 33 centimeters, they're still narrow enough, but the increased stability and force input accuracy compared to the hood's position is good to have when you're traveling that fast. It is important to acknowledge that I am an experienced road cyclist. I also have narrow shoulders, and I'm also used to riding time trial bikes. But that said, I'm definitely no Peter Sagan when it comes to bike handling, and I'll happily admit that I can't even wheelie. But before you go and buy a set of 20-something centimeter bars, the results of this testing are based on my level of experience, which is probably beyond your average cyclist. Right, let's get on to the drawbacks. The first and most obvious one is the lack of available space on the tops of the handlebars. You essentially lose the tops of the handlebar hand position unless you don't mind putting your hands right up against the stem. You'll also struggle for handlebar mounted accessories like cycling computers and lights. If you like climbing hills with your hands on the tops, or simply find it a more relaxing upright position to ride in, you won't like handlebars like this. As I briefly mentioned, climbing out of the saddle on steep climbs is also less comfortable than with wider handlebars. You have to use more of your upper body strength to stabilise the bike as your hands are so much closer together. I got around this simply by selecting easier gears and climbing seated more of the time, but whether you can do that depends on how low the gears on your bike go and how steep the hills are. Nevertheless, if you regularly ride lots of very steep climbs, or if you have a strong preference for climbing out of the saddle, then I can see this being less enjoyable and more tiring on bars this narrow. So how narrow is too narrow? Am I suggesting everyone switch to 26 centimeter handlebars then? No, and I don't think I'll be sticking with them either. For general road riding, 26 centimeters at the hoods is probably too narrow even for me. Ultimately, how narrow is too narrow is a question that each rider will have to answer for themselves. As mentioned, I didn't have any major issues using handlebars that narrow, but they do make for a very aggressive riding position with no space on the tops for a relaxed upright position. They're all race all of the time, and even a performance weenie like me enjoys riding slowly sometimes. Prior to this testing, I had been using 36 centimeter handlebars, which is very narrow even by modern standards. But what I've really learned is that I don't want to go to anything wider than that after testing these bars. So what is the perfect bar width for road bikes? I'm confident that handlebars in the region of 36 to 40 centimeters are unlikely to cause any handling issues for the majority of cyclists. Providing you have no issues with the fit, they should make you a little bit faster for no extra effort. For me, they're an obvious upgrade for an aero road bike or any kind of go-fast road bike build. My current favourite road handlebar is a Rose Race Attack GF Aero bar in a 36 centimeter size. It has a 36 centimeter hood position with a 40.5 centimeter drops position. It lacks internal cable routing and it doesn't have the traditional bend drops that I'm fond of, but it cost just €23.95. It was an absolute bargain and was purchased before Rose stopped selling bikes and parts to the UK. It's the handlebar that I'll be returning to when I take the Works track bars off of my giant TCR. But what do you think is the perfect handlebar width? Have I made you think twice about the width of the handlebars on your road bike? Or are you even more sure that a 44 centimeter bar is perfect for you? Please let me know in the comments below. And after you've left us a lovely detailed comment, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so that every time we upload a new video, you'll get a notification.